Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the RELO Bangkok AUA webinar for February. We're really excited to share with you about pronunciation perfection. With us, we have Mr. Joshua Bernstein, and he is going to share about some tips and tricks about pronunciation and how we can use that in our classroom. Just a few notes to think about before we start the webinar. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and we will address them as it goes along or at the end, whichever is most appropriate. Additionally, what was the last thing? Oh, yes, most important. Please set your chat box to all panelists and attendees, and that way everyone's in on the chat and nobody's wondering what people are saying to me exclusively. Excellent. So now we're going to pass it over to Joshua Bernstein and learn more about pronunciation perfection. Take it away, Joshua.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Bernstein, and I am a lecturer at Thammasat University in Bangkok, Thailand. In addition to teaching many listening and speaking classes, I also work as an oral examiner for Cambridge English. I've been teaching in Southeast Asia for the past 7 years, and it's with this background and a firm grounding of the literature that set the foundation for today's webinar. So I'm going to begin today with some questions to get a sense of our audience. And so Trisha is going to help me with this.
Excellent. So the first one is, where are you from? I'm going to launch the poll. And where are you from? Are you from Burma, Myanmar, Malaysia, Thailand, or other? Oh, it looks like right now we've got 100% Thailand. That's excellent. Joshua has some great tips about specifically for Thai speakers.
Okay, so we're going to move on.
Nope, let's give it just one, let's give it like 30 more seconds for people to respond because we don't have everybody responding yet. Almost, but not quite. So we will just give it 5 more seconds. Oh, look, we have somebody coming with us from Burma. That's excellent. I will end the poll. So it looks like what we have is about 25% of us right now are from Burma, Myanmar, and the other 75% from Thailand. Great. I'll just share the results quickly, and then just so that you can see them, then we'll move on. Excellent.
Okay, so we're going to move on to question number 2.
Okay, and I will launch this poll. Who do you teach? Do you teach primary school students, secondary school students, university students, or other? Maybe you teach all of them. Okay, it looks like we're 50-50 between primary school and secondary school. We're going to wait just a minute for some more people to vote if they would, and if they can. 10 more seconds. Okay, excellent. It looks like primary school won out with 67% of our attendees right now. And primary school, that's excellent. I will end the poll now and I'll share the results with us all. Okay. Fantastic. What are we doing next now?
Question number 3. How do you feel about teaching pronunciation?
Well, this is a great question. Great question. I will launch the poll now. So the 3 options are very confident, fairly confident, or not confident. Tell us what you think about that. Fairly confident right now is what we've got with a few people responding. We're going to give it like 10 more seconds. Okay, I don't know if we're going to get any more responses right now because sometimes people can't get it to work, can't get Zoom to work exactly all the time, which is fine. So that Joshua knows, I will end this. It looks like that fairly confident wins out. Excellent. So I just shared the poll with you so you can see that. And excellent.
Okay, well, great. That's great to have a better sense of today's audience. And I hope by the end of this presentation, you feel more confident teaching pronunciation. So I want to start with talking about what pronunciation is. And I want to emphasize the fact that pronunciation is not just mental, but it is physical as well. And by physical, I mean that we are using our body when we pronounce sounds. We are using our lips, our tongue, our throat. And what I like to discuss with my students is when we pronounce sounds, that not only can we hear, but we can also see and feel the different sounds. And so that's something that I'm going to talk about today in the presentation, and hopefully something that you can bring as a tool to use in your classrooms as well. So to start, we're going to do this activity. So this is about feeling the different sounds that our mouth makes. And so this is something that you can do with me here. And we're going to start at the top, and we're going to go from left to right. And what I want you to notice is how your mouth position changes as you pronounce the different sounds. So here we go. First sound, ah,
Ah.
oh,
Oh.
oh. Next row,
Mm.
e.
E.
Next row, j, u. Okay, so notice how the mouth changes. Do you feel the difference?
I will go in and I say, yes, I can feel the difference between the sounds. I did that with you. I don't know if anyone else out there saw that, but I definitely did it with you. It was a great test.
So why do we want to teach pronunciation? Well, the first reason is it's scalable. So what I typically do in my classes is I start with a foundation, and as the semester progresses, I build upon and progress upon hints in ways that students can improve their pronunciation. I also find that teaching pronunciation in my classes is very engaging. Typically, people are laughing and smiling because doing certain things with your mouth, it makes you silly. And because you're using your body, it involves students in a way that they may not be when they're practicing other, like reading English. Also, there's observable learning. And by this, I mean that as a teacher, we can observe our students learning. And I'll talk more about this at the end of my presentation. But students can also observe their own learning as well. So they can pronounce a word and possibly make a mistake, then learn how to pronounce the word correctly, and then pronounce it correctly, and actually observe learning, their own learning. Also, students can observe other students learning and mispronouncing and then pronouncing correctly. And it's through this that students really start to improve their confidence in speaking English. And because pronunciation and speaking are productive skills, it will also improve receptive skills such as listening. Okay, so we're going to do another poll. And in this poll, I want you to think about who uses English. So I'm going to ask for Trisha's help.
Yes, I was just busy in the chat box for a second, but I will launch the poll now. So as Joshua said, the questions are, most English speakers are. So I'm launching it. There's 3 questions here if you could answer all 3. Most English speakers are native English speakers, non-native English speakers. Second question, most English teachers are native English speakers, non-native English speakers. And then the third question is, most English interactions are between native English speakers or non-native English speakers. What do you guys think?
And I just want to define these terms as you take this poll. These aren't the most ideal terms, but what I mean by native English speaker here is if you started speaking English as a child, and non-native if in your country your L1 or your first language is not English.
Okay, we're getting some interesting results here. Okay, we'll give it just like about 10 more seconds for a few more people to respond. So right now what we're looking at is for the first question, most English speakers are, we do have non-native English speakers winning out. The second one, most English teachers are, we have 100% of the respondents right now saying that they're non-native English speakers. And the third one, it's 80% think that it's non-native English speakers. Well, we're gonna end the poll and we're gonna see what Joshua has to tell us about that. I'll just share the poll first. Share the results. Okay. So let's see. What do we have there, Joshua?
Okay, so for most English teachers, you are right. Yes, most English speakers are non-native English speakers. For most English teachers, you are also right. Yes, most English teachers are non-native English speakers. And yes, again, you are correct. Most English interactions are between non-native speakers.
Excellent.
Okay. So moving on, I want to talk about, because this presentation is entitled Pronunciation Perfection, I want to clarify what I mean by perfection. And I'm going to start by what I don't mean. And what I don't mean is accent reduction. Okay, accent reduction sounds like stain removal. Okay, the goal of this presentation and your goal as teachers is not to remove the accent from your students, because in fact, accent and pronunciation are not the same thing. And there is no correct or perfect accent. Everyone has an accent. Accent is part of your identity. In fact, linguist David Crystal said the only person that really needs to remove their accent is if you want to be like a spy. And so what is the goal? The goal is intelligibility. And what I mean by intelligibility is I mean being able to be understood in an international context. The reason why this is the goal is it reflects the reality for our students, the typical types of interactions that they will have. It's also achievable. So it's not very realistic to have my students, for example, to try to sound like me, but it is realistic to have them be intelligible. Through emphasizing intelligibility, we are also recognizing the diversity of English. English is not just spoken in the United States or in England or Australia, but English is spoken all around the world. And finally, through doing this, we avoid native speakerism. Native speakerism is the idea that native English speakers are the best teachers of English. And so how do we go about accomplishing this goal and helping our students to become more intelligible? Well, we start with predicting. And what I mean predicting is having some idea of where our students are. And if you have been teaching for a while, this is likely something that you know before your students come into the classroom. If you're teaching students with your own nationality, you will most likely know the issues that they will have. Alternatively, you can conduct some type of needs analysis to determine that. Today, I'm gonna focus more on perform and practice. And what I mean by perform is this is you as a teacher performing how to pronounce these sounds for your students and having your students in your class perform these sounds, say these sounds. And through doing this, provide individual attention to students, helping students to improve their pronunciation and helping to reinforce that learning with praising them for doing good, for doing well. And then finally, I'm going to talk about practice. And what I mean by practice, this is the practice your students do outside of the classroom. So most of the learning to improve one's pronunciation is not going to happen in the short time that you have with your students, but through encouraging students to practice outside of classroom, that's where they're truly going to improve. Okay, so again, I'm going to focus here on perform and practice. So to begin with, we're going to talk about consonants. Consonants are typically the most difficult issue that my students have. Typically, vowels are not as difficult for Thai students to pronounce. Part of the reason for this is, for example, in the Thai language, there are much more vowels than in the English language, but often consonants, especially those that do not exist in Thai, the sounds that do not exist in Thai, are the most difficult. Again, emphasizing this idea of feeling the sounds, I like to do this activity with my students. And so I'm going to ask for Trisha to help me with this activity.
Okay, what are we doing here? I'd love to help.
Okay, and so for this activity, we're going to be, so we just thought about our lips, right? We thought about our mouth. Mm-hmm. Now what we're going to be focusing is on our tongue. And we want to notice if our tongue is in the up position behind the tooth ridge. And so we're going to pronounce each of these sounds. And Trisha, I would like you to tell me, is your tongue not doing anything, or is it up behind the tooth ridge? So let's start with the first sound.
Okay, ba, ba. Tongue stays kind of basically where it is.
Yeah, and so if we make the B sound, the tongue stays, like ba. Trisha said, basically where it is. If you do this activity with your students, what I have found is my students will say B, B, B. It's not B, 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 it's B, B, B. So make sure they're making the sound of the letter. They're not just saying the letter. Okay.
That's what, you know, I would just want to say that is a really good point with pronunciation, is that it's not about the name of the letter, it's about the sound of the letter. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because that can be a little bit confusing when you're talking about it, when you see the visual representation of it. Like for me to say, oh, that's D, but that's not what you're asking me to do, right? Yeah. You're asking me to say duh, 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 which now I will tell you, tongue right there behind the teeth.
And you are correct.
Yay.
Okay, let's move on to the next one.
Okay. Behind the teeth again.
That's correct. And last one?
It's more, it stays lower. It doesn't go up and tap behind the teeth.
Yeah, good. And so again, part of this activity and many of the activities I will do in my classes is I want my students to hear the difference, but I also want them to feel the difference. There are a couple of consonants that are difficult, especially for Thai students. One of them is the L sound. And in English, we have two different L sounds. The first one is called the light L. The light L is at the beginning of words or before vowels. And so, for example, we have the word light, allow, and belly. And when I teach my students this sound, I get them to think about their lips and their tongue. And so to make this sound, our lips are in a neutral position. And it's mostly what we're doing with our tongue. So our tongue is forward, behind, against that roof of the mouth roof. And so this sound is oh, oh. And for example, the word hello, hello. As I said, there are two L sounds in English. And so if we remove the O, this L sound actually changes. So if we pronounce this like a light L and we went hell, it would sound very strange. Instead, this L sound is what we call a dark L. And a dark L is used at the end of a word or before a consonant. The sound of a dark L is well, fall, wall. Similar type of lip position to the light L, but with a dark L, we have our tongue actually through our teeth. And so if we go back again and we think about the hello, the L sound, our tongue is up behind our teeth. Hello, hello. And then when we make this sound for L, the dark sound, our tongue is actually sticking out. Hell, hell.
Joshua, can I interrupt here? That one thing when I was looking at your PowerPoint before that I really noticed with the differences between these two L's is it's almost as if with the light L, it's almost, it really is light. It's like a tap almost. It just like taps your teeth, you know, hello, 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 you know, and then it goes on to the next sound. Whereas with the dark L, and I noticed that when you were describing them, and I'm practicing, of course, that the other one really does what you said. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is for our viewers that they can say these sounds themselves and practice what you're doing on here, and they can become aware themselves. As I was doing that, that's why I thought I would bring that up, because I was doing it as you were presenting.
Yeah, and the idea again here is not only can we hear the difference, but it's feeling the difference. And I'll often have my students look at each other and I'll ask, can you see the difference as well? So do you see when your other students, when they go hell, do you see their tongue? And so just realizing what our mouth is doing is important to pronounce sounds correctly. So moving on, the next consonant that is difficult, especially for Thai speakers, is R. In fact, many Thai speakers will interchange R and L. So it's really important that we cover R sounds. In English, an R sound you should be able to hold. And it sounds like run, relax, rabbit. With the R sound, we have both things that we're doing with our lips and things that we're doing with our tongue. And so for this sound, the first thing that we want to think about is our lips. And for one of the R sounds, we're going to make our lips a tight O shape. And the way I explain this to my students is like, pretend you're going to kiss someone. So I get them all to make like a kissy face, and then think about their tongue. And so for this sound, the tongue is in the middle of the mouth, and they should feel tension in their tongue. It should feel like someone is pulling it back. Someone is pulling it back. The tip should not be touching anything, and the size of the tongue should be touching the teeth. And so if we go to make this sound Rachel, okay, lips tight, tongue back, Rachel. Rachel. When we make the R sound and the R is at the end of a word, we're doing something different with our lips. When we make the R sound at the end of a word, the lips are more relaxed. So if we go from saying the word Rachel to the word father, we should notice that our lips are doing something different. Rachel, father. Okay, so because the R and the L are quite difficult and often become interchanged, I find a very helpful activity to do is like a minimal pairs activity. And so I'm going to call up Trisha. I'm going to call up Trisha to help me with this.
It's all good. It's all good. I can be Rachel, whatever. Rachel or Trisha, but Trisha here. But my name doesn't start with an R, but it does have an R in it. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay, so this is a minimal pairs activity. And if you look here, we have two columns. We have column A and we have column B. Column A has L's, column B has R's. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so typically how I will do this in my class is I will first start and I will pronounce a word and I will have my students guess which column the word is in and which number it is. And so I'll start doing that with Rachel, with Trisha. Now it's stuck in my head.
That's okay. I'll call you Josiah. No, I'm kidding. It's all good. It really is all good.
Okay, so Trisha, I'm going to say a word. The word is bar.
Bar. Okay, that is row 3, column B.
Yes. So I'm saying bar, bar. So typically how I start this activity is I first do it and I see if my students can hear the difference. And then what I will do is I will then have my students try this activity. And part of this is having them observe their own learning. So for example, if a student goes to pronounce one of these sounds and they try to say this word and they say light, and the rest of the students say column A, I'll have them think about how they pronounce the sound, say the sound again, and this will be a way that they can observe their own learning and also have other students in the class observe their learning as well. There's lots of variations of this that you can do depending on the level of students. So as I was talking about before, a lot of these activities are scalable. And so typically when I have students do this activity, if it's very easy for them, I'll take it to the next level. And the next level is what I'll have them do is I'll have them hide their mouth. And so I'll have them do the activity often with a partner, and I'll have them hide their mouth and see if they can guess the correct column and number. If that's easy, I'll take it again to another level. And to do that, I'll have them pronounce the sound, but this time not actually make any sound. So this will be getting them to see the difference. So they will pronounce a word and they'll see if their partners can actually see the sound. And so Trisha, are you ready to try this?
I am ready. I am ready.
Okay, so I'm going to pronounce a sound, but I'm not going to use any sound. I'm
going to have to
use
get my
mouth. Yeah, you're going to have to look. All right, so here we go. The word is
light.
Yeah, correct. Good.
Whoa.
So again, and might be difficult at first, but this really emphasizes the idea of hearing differences in sounds, seeing the sound, and also feeling the sound, feeling what you're doing with your mouth. Thank you, Trisha.
Yes, can I just say, I love this activity for, like, especially this part that you just did where they say it without actually saying the sounds, because it causes me as the person trying to guess what you're doing to really think, okay, what shape does his mouth need to be to make what sound? And I think that's a fantastic activity. Wanted to interject that.
Okay, so now we're gonna get some audience participation. We're gonna move on. We're gonna do another type of minimal pairs activity. This is called a pronunciation pyramid. And so I'm gonna ask for Trisha to come on back.
Oh, excellent.
And we're gonna do another poll.
Sorry about this. So I think why don't you, I'll launch the poll, and then as you do this activity and you explain it, people can then register their responses. Okay, does that sound like a good plan?
Yes. And so how this activity is done is it begins, I like to begin with saying start, so people know that you are starting, and then you go down the pyramid with the goal of someone being able to guess your final destination. And if we look at our final different destinations here, we have flags from different countries. So number 1, that's the United States. Number 2, that's Thailand. Number 3, that is Brazil. 4 is South Korea. And 5 is Australia. And so if I'm, for example, teaching a lesson on Southeast Asia, you can change these flags around to be like different countries in Southeast Asia. And this is something similar to the minimal pairs activity we just did that I might first do and have my students guess what the final destination is, and then have my students do it as well together. And so we're going to do this. I will start, and then you will guess as participants what is the final destination. Okay, so here we go. Here we go. Start. Correct. Read. Rent. Arrive. I'll do it one more time.
Excellent.
start, correct, read, rent, arrive.
Okay, everybody, let's see what you come up with the, what was the final destination with all those words? Was it the United States, Thailand, Brazil, South Korea, or Australia? Okay, this is kind of interesting, the results that we're getting. We're kind of split. And I think that that really shows how it is difficult to hear these different sounds, especially when it's not something that you were brought up with, you know, that you have to train yourself. And so I think that's all the more reason that you should help your students and train your students.
And another thing that I would like to say from an instructor's perspective, teaching pronunciation and thinking about these sounds has really improved my own pronunciation, even as a native speaker, because now I think about how I am speaking, and I think it has actually improved the clarity of my own pronunciation in my classes, helping my students as well.
That is such a great point about how it can be a reflective activity. All these things are. Okay, so I'm going to give it like just a few seconds. Oh, look, we're good. Now I'm going to end the poll now, and I'll share it with you. And share results. So it looks like we have it kind of split between Thailand and Brazil, which would be alive and arrive, and Australia. I thought it was the United States. Was that, is that where? Yeah,
right. So
we do have one that said the United States, but that's interesting though. And why this is kind of challenging is that if you miss some along the way and you just hear the last one, you could actually end up in Brazil or Australia. If you say you missed lead, you heard lead instead of read, you could still end up, or you didn't hear rent, you could still end up with arrive. So that's why it's a really interesting and fun activity. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a pretty fun activity. And again, I like the fact that, you know, you can put whatever pictures below that you want. They don't have to be flags. They could be animals. You know, you can really adapt this to all sorts of lessons that you have. Additionally, even the words that you use. I mean, this is talking about R and L, but there are lots of different pair activities, minimal pair activities that you can use and replace instead. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on. So we were talking about consonants. Another activity that is fun to do in class are tongue twisters. And so lots of different tongue twisters that we can do with R and L. So for example, this one is red lorry, yellow lorry. Another one that we can do is red blood, bad blood. And another one, rolling red wagons. If you want to do these in class, I have to practice them first because sometimes they're difficult for even me to say. But again, it gets you thinking about how your mouth is making different positions and getting us to think about the physicality of pronunciation. Okay, so final consonants. So we talked about consonants. Now we're going to talk about final consonants. And final consonants, at least in Thailand, with my students, I found are really the most common mistake. And what will happen generally is words such as find turn to fine, tears turns to tear, and wine turns to why. And the reason why this is the most common mistake, one has to do with what's called L1 interference. So depending on what your native language is, typically you'll start speaking any additional languages that you teach in a similar fashion. So for example, Thai speakers, this word here in English, we pronounce Nepal, but Thai speakers would pronounce Napan. Also, for example, in Thai, there is less aspiration on final consonants. So here, the word in English would be hot, but a Thai speaker would not aspirate that final consonant in the same way. The pronunciation would be hot. And another example here, in English, we would pronounce this word dad, but a Thai speaker would pronounce it dad. And so it's really important that we emphasize that final consonant sound. Also in Thai, there are just fewer final consonant sounds possible. So that's why this tends to be difficult. And so to teach final consonant sounds, I begin with discussing the difference between what are called voiced and unvoiced sounds. And to do this, I get my students to start feeling the difference, feeling the sounds. For voiced sounds, I have my students use their hand and touch their throat. For these sounds, your throat or your vocal cords vibrate. And so if we pronounce each of these sounds, we should be able to feel our voice box. We should feel here vibrate. So you can do these with me. The first sound is B, B. Second sound, D, D. V, V. G, G. So again, this is about not just hearing the different sounds, but also being able to feel the sounds as well. If we move on to unvoiced sounds, I have my students continue to have their hand on their throat, but they will notice here that they will not have the same, they will not be able to feel the vibration that they do with the voice sounds, because unvoiced sounds, the sound is made through the air passing through the mouth. So the sound is coming from here, from your mouth, not from here. So if we hold our throat for these, you should not feel the same vibration as we do for the voiced sounds. And so this is going to become very helpful when we go on to pronounce final consonant sounds. And so I will often ask my students, where is the sound coming from? Is it voiced or unvoiced? Just to emphasize how common final consonant sounds are, I have a very common mistake Thai speakers will make. In Thailand, this restaurant or this cafe, coffee shop is Starbucks. Of course, we're not pronouncing that final consonant S. And so I'm constantly in my classes reminding my students to pronounce that final consonant sound. S is very difficult. S is very difficult in part because there's actually 3 different S ending sounds. And to understand the difference between these sounds, you have to understand voiced and unvoiced. And so I will first begin, when I teach these sounds, with the S sound. And so I'll have my students pronounce this sound, s, 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 and I'll ask them, is this sound voiced or unvoiced? And so they'll touch their throat, s, s, s. Where is the sound coming from? This sound is an unvoiced sound. So if you hold your throat and you say, s, 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 you should not feel vibration. Next, we will look at the consonant before the S. So if we look at these words, we have T, P, and K. These sounds are T, P, K. So each of these final consonants or consonants before the S are all unvoiced sounds. And so the rule is the unvoiced S sound is used when the consonant before the S is unvoiced. So this word is seat, s, rope, s, back, s. For this sound is z, z, similar to a Z sound. And again, I will ask my students, is this Z voiced or unvoiced? So if we hold our throats and we make this sound, zzz, zzz. We should feel some vibration in our vocal cords. And if we look at the consonants before the S, so we have here D, B, and G, D, B, G. We should notice these are all voiced sounds. And so the rule for Z is we make that sound when the consonant before the S is voiced. So this word is seed, Z, robe, Z, bag, Z. For the final sound, this sound is Ez. In this one, we can look, these are called IPA symbols, or the rough English sound. And when we have these before the S, the sound is Ez. And so this word is misses. This word is causes. This word is watches. This word is changes, wishes, and garages. The next final consonant sound that's difficult is D, specifically ED. And so in all my classes, I teach my students how to pronounce the ED sound. This is difficult, just like S, because there are 3 different ED sounds. And so typically before I teach my students how to make this sound, I have them do a quiz. And so I have them do a quiz like this, where they go through and they take a guess what the sound for ED is. After having them do this quiz, I then teach them how to know the difference. And to know the different ED sounds are t, d, and id. And very similar to the S sound, to know how to make the ED sound, we have to think about unvoiced and voiced sounds. And so for the t sound, I have my students think about, is this voiced or unvoiced? And so if we make the t sound, t, 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 this is a voiced sound. And similar to the S, we look at the consonant before the ED. And if we look at these 3 examples, we have p, k, s, and each of these consonants are unvoiced. And so if the consonant before the ED is unvoiced, then the ED sound is unvoiced. And so for this first one, the word is hoped, looked, kissed. The next sound is d, d. And so if we touch our throat, d, 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 we should feel vibration. And if we look at these different consonants before the D, we have N, N, we have V, V. And if we notice here, we have an S. Now, if we look at this word, kissed, we notice this sound is S. But if we look here, this sound is not S. This is the Z sound. And so because it's a voiced Z, Z, this word is used. So the rule is, if it's a voiced consonant before the ED, the sound is D. The final one is the easiest. So how do we know if it's an id sound? All we have to do is look at the letter before the ED, the consonant before the ED. If it's a T or a D, the sound is id. And so as I was saying before, I scale these lessons. So if I am teaching students who have a very low English proficiency level, I often will not teach them these first 2 parts because T and D have very similar sounds. And so for example, if we say hopped or we say hopped, I would still understand. But if we said hopped, I say my couch I would not understand. And so the most important one here is the id sound. And this is the easiest to know because all we have to do is look, see if there is a T or a D before the ED. And if there is, the sound is id. So this first word is wanted, needed, painted. The final thing with regards to consonants that I teach are what are called consonant clusters. A cluster is a group of similar things. And so here we see a cluster of people. In Thai, for example, there are not as many possible cluster sounds. So many Thai speakers have difficulty pronouncing consonant clusters. When we make a consonant cluster, we pronounce the sounds together. And so here we have spul. This word is split. Pull, pulle. Tur, turry. Skr, skirreen. Typically, the issue that I find with Thai speakers is because they're not used to the consonant cluster, they will add a vowel in between. So instead of pronouncing, for example, tur, they will add the vowel a, and this word won't be tree, it'll be tari, tari. But we want to remind our students, these sounds are pronounced together. So this word is tur, turi. One way that I get my students to see and feel and also hear the difference between these sounds is to use visual aids. And there's a lot of different ways that we can bring visual aids into our classrooms. One is using a mirror, or if our students don't have a mirror, they can use their phone. Or I'll often have my students look at each other. And so they can look at each other as a visual aid. As an instructor, I can also demonstrate with my mouth. I can have my students look at my mouth, or we can use different types of diagrams, such as the one on the screen, to kind of point out what our tongue, what our lips are doing. One of the sounds that is difficult, especially for Thai speakers, is TH. The reason why is because in Thai, this sound does not exist. And so to teach students the TH sound, I tell them it's 3 steps. Step 1, you must stick out your tongue. And so I have everyone in my class stick out their tongue. Step number 2, bite down on your tongue. And step number 3, blow. And so for this sound, the blow is similar to an F sound. But we want to remember to stick out our tongue. And so this sound is typically in my classes, I teach my students this sound on the first day because I know it's going to be something difficult for them. And I will actually go around the room and I will check each student to see if they can pronounce this sound. So individual feedback can be really, really helpful for our students. For this sound especially, the most common mistake is students don't stick out their tongue. So that's why I have rule number 2 here, that they bite down on their tongue, because many of our students, when they go to pronounce this sound, it's going to sound like an S sound. Even if they stick out their tongue, they'll do something like s, s. And so often when I go around, I'll say, you got to stick out your tongue, stick out your tongue. I also like to remind them, especially because I'm going around, don't spit. So I tell them, it's blow, not spit. It's not, so don't spit. So this is the unvoiced sound, right? The unvoiced sound, it's coming from here. In English, we also have another TH sound spelled the same way. It's called the voiced sound. But before we get to that, I just want to point out, this is another activity we can do. So this is just showing students how the unvoiced sound can become like at the beginning of a word, in the middle of a word, or at the end of a word. And typically what I will notice in my classes is if a student mispronounces a word, I'll write it down and I will add it to activities like this. Last week, for example, we were talking about like races and running, and I had a student pronounce this middle word here, marathon. And so I had to remind them, marathon, thon. And so I often will put words that I notice my students having mistakes with. I'll try to predict common mispronounced words. And so this is the unvoiced sound. The voiced TH sound is very similar. It begins with the first two steps. So stick out your tongue, bite your tongue, but instead of blowing for the TH sound, we make a buzz. So the buzz is similar to a Z sound in English. Zzz. So this word, this sound is stick out your tongue, bite down on your tongue, and buzz. It's v, v, v. Because it's a voice sound, I'll have my students hold their throat or touch their throat, v. And they should be able to feel the difference between the unvoiced and the voiced. V. This is typically, students laugh. It's a fun thing to do in class. And again, I think it creates more of an engaging classroom when we're doing these pronunciation activities. I also like to have my students practice. And so we will typically do something like this with the voiced sound. So practicing the voice sound at the beginning of a word, the voice sound in the middle of a word, and the voice sound at the end of a word. Another activity I have that I do is the poem I call Buzz and Blow. And so this is a poem where students are transitioning between both the buzzing and the blowing with the TH sound. And I will have them use their hand because I want them to feel the difference. So the hand recognizing the unvoiced sound and the voiced sound. Okay. So this brings us to the practice. And the practice is what students should be doing outside of class. Because most of their learning, most of the improvement is not going to happen in the short time that you see them every week. They really need to practice outside of class. And there's lots of different resources that they can use to do that. One resource is to record yourself. So to record yourself speaking English and to hear how you are pronouncing sounds. Another tool is to use voice texting. So on most phones today, we can speak into our phones and have those words be typed. And so we can do this and see if the words that is typed is the same word that we're saying. We can also listen. So by doing the receptive skill of listening, it will help us to improve the productive skill of speaking. Singing is another option. So many of our students might enjoy singing, might enjoy karaoke. There's lots of different apps. So for example, this app Smule is a karaoke app where they can sing along in English. There's also websites. So this website, Lyrics Training, this is a website where students can watch popular music videos and then they have to listen for the words and then type in the word that they hear. Another resource is YouTube. So typically how I begin my classes is I like to have music on when my students come into class. And typically I use what are called lyric videos. So this is like a music video, but they actually have the words that are being sung as part of the music video. And so I find that having music starts to energize my students. And while they're waiting for class to begin, if they're seeing the words and they're hearing the words, they often will kind of sing along. So it's getting them to start using their English before I even begin teaching. And so lyric videos look something like this. And again, there's lots of different ones online if you on like YouTube and different sites.
Joshua, if I can just interject here, I would just like to make a personal testimonial about using these type of videos. I think it so helps my students, but I've noticed even as I've learned languages myself as as a student myself, that having the music, it helps me somehow, it puts it in a different part of my brain or something, I don't know, but it really, really helps. So that is just a second witness, shall we say, to the use of songs and seeing the lyrics, because it kind of does the visual, it does the auditory, it does the whole package. So just wanted to put that out there.
And I'm also trying to always get my students motivated to learn English. Many of my students they like English songs. They know about English music from the US. And so the music that I'm playing in class are songs that they often know. And so I used to play the music I like, but now, you know, it's more pop music from the US that I know they like, because I want to make sure that they're engaged with this music. It's not to say that I don't like Ed Sheeran, he's fine, but you know. Another thing we can use is things like TED Talks. And so TED Talks is a great resource to use with our students. And there's different types of TED Talks. So some TED Talks have like a speaker talking, but there's also animated TED Talks, which are very useful, and they will use words and animation. I find these are much more engaging, especially for my lower level students. And I also like to use the different resources available on YouTube. So here, for example, we have a TED Talk about why do we dream? And this is going to be a visual type of video. And for many of our students, they probably know some of the resources. So for example, subtitles. Another thing that we can use is the playback speed, so we can slow down if the video is too fast. Another one I like to show my students that many of them don't know is if we go down here and we open transcript. Another thing that YouTube offers is a actually written out transcript of the words being said. Now, this does not exist on all YouTube videos, but many of them will have this option, and you can have Thai, you can have English. And so here we're actually seeing the English words, and this is a great way that we can practice pronouncing the words as we hear them. Okay, and so a big part of this is observed learning. And so it's important that our students observe their own learning, because I think that for the most part, it really helps to motivate to see your own progress. But also as a teacher, it's important that we also see our students progress. I think it's motivating for us as well. And so what I try to do as an instructor, or my goal in my classes, is to move from an active role to a facilitator role. And eventually the ideal is to move to a passive role. And so as an active role, after I have taught a pronunciation lesson, like how to pronounce the voiced or unvoiced TH sound, and it's likely that our students are going to make those mistakes, I will begin by pointing out the mistake and reminding them of the lesson that I taught. Eventually, I will try to move to a facilitator role. Here, I will be pointing out the student's mistake. I will stop them, but I will not correct them. I will try to get someone else in the class to correct them. The goal after this is to have, if a student makes a mistake, you stop them and they self-correct. So in many of my classes, because I'm always going trying to remind them of the final S sound, all I have to do is this, and my students know, oh, I forgot to say S. And finally, a passive role. And so this is a part where you don't do anything and students self-correct themselves and eventually make no mistake. Okay, so I'm going to conclude here just talking about my teaching philosophy. This is something I typically talk about in all of my first classes. My teaching philosophy is pit, bend, crew. Pit, bend, crew is called a proverb. And in the United States, we have a similar proverb. The proverb is, we learn by our mistakes. And the reason why I always talk about this in my classes is I've often found that my students are shy to speak English. Often they're shy, or they're afraid to speak English because they're afraid to make a mistake. And so what I try to do in my classes is remove that fear from them and in fact, encourage them to make mistakes. Because the only way that our students can improve is if they make mistakes. And so one thing my students will often start saying to each other is pit bend crew, pit bend crew. So not being afraid to make mistakes. I tell my students that the goal of the class is not for you not to make a mistake. The goal of the class is that by the end, they're making less mistakes, okay? And so that brings me to my conclusion. One thing I do want to say before I finish is I have these PowerPoint slides available. So I have right here a QR code. And so if you scan this code, it'll bring you to my site and you should be able to find a copy of my PowerPoint. Also, I have my contact information. So I have my email and I also have a Facebook page that I use with my students.
Excellent, Joshua. There was a question about that, so I'm glad you brought that up about the PowerPoint, because some people were mentioning that they loved the activities, but it was just a little bit too fast for them to get all of them, or they showed up a little bit late. I do have two other questions that came in the Q&A box that I would like to talk about or ask you about. One was about the soft G versus the hard G, and how, if there's a rule or a way that you can differentiate when you use one and when you use the other.
I don't have a specific lesson that I cover with my students.
Okay.
But I mean, again, a big thing is emphasizing being able to see, being able to feel, and being able to hear the difference. And so one difficulty that I know, like I have as a language learner myself, is even just like hearing the difference. And so, for example, I'm in Thailand, I'm learning Thai. Thai is a tonal language. And so I often have to ask people to repeat the sound over and over again. And so it's really important that we, take the time to be able to hear the difference. Because if we don't hear the difference, it's going to be very difficult for us to pronounce the sounds differently.
So if I could just add something about the soft G versus hard G, it's a little bit difficult in English because while there's a general idea about it, that generally the hard G is with the A, the O, the U, and the soft G is with the I, the E, and the Y written, that it's not always firm. Like the example would be get, that's spelled G-E-T. That should be jet, but it's not. So I think there is a certain amount of memorization. And like Joshua said, listening is so key in just with all that. I think that that's just fantastic how Joshua's taught us today that we need to listen and feel, and that's so much of what pronunciation is about. We do have one other question. It's very similar to that. It's the TH, the voiced and the unvoiced. And is there any way, do you have a rule or something that might help the students know? I have to say, I don't really know a rule. Maybe you do.
So to know the difference, the most important thing I emphasize is T or D. Is there a T or a D before the ED sound? If there is, then the sound is id. My expectation is not necessarily that every time my student sees ED that they go and start doing this and try to figure out if it's voiced or unvoiced. But the very simple way to do it is just look to see if there's a T or a D before the ED sound.
I'm sorry, I didn't make that clear. It's the TH sound, sorry. Is there a way for the TH sound? I don't really know one. I think it's memorization. What do you think?
Yeah, English is difficult.
Yeah.
Many letters. So for example, C has different sounds, has 3 different sounds that can be used as well. This is part why I encourage my students that it's not about not making mistakes. It's about, improving upon how you do and making less mistakes. Even native English speakers, even different accents. So when I listen to people from different parts of the United States or from other countries speak English, sometimes they make sounds very differently. I'm from an area near Boston, and so the way that people pronounce words in Boston is not necessarily the correct pronunciation, but it's intelligible. And so that's why it's really important that we emphasize the importance of intelligibility, because overall, that's what's needed if we're going to be trying to communicate with people from different countries.
Joshua, one thing that I just love that you said about the making mistakes, I think that that can go for us as teachers as well. Don't you? Is that like, if we do make mistakes, we learn from those as well. And to have that boldness to go. And I know for example, one language I speak is Spanish, and to try and teach that, I have to be really bold. And so it is a great mindset to have as a non-native English speaker to try and teach pronunciation, to be bold. And if you make a few mistakes, that's fine, but just to go ahead and try and help the best you can for your students, and help the best you can. So I love that you brought that up. That is such a good point. I just wanted to circle back to that. I missed it before I said the questions, but I just think as teachers, we can learn from that as well, not just students. So I love your point.
If you are someone that has learned English, I think a great thing that you can share with your students is the problems or the difficulties that you've had yourself. For me, I like to share with my students the difficulty that I have learning Thai. And so for me, there are many sounds in Thai that are difficult, that I have problems with as an English speaker. For example, ra, rua, rua, and my students often laugh at me, but it's just illustrating, it's being, showing a human side that, look, pronunciation can be really difficult, and that we're all just trying to improve, trying to get better.
Excellent. I don't see that we have any more questions. And what a fantastic presentation, Joshua. Thank you very much for sharing all this with us and giving us the guidance. Yes, they love it. And please pass it along to your friends about this as well. If you didn't, it will be up on the RELO website, YouTube channel. Sorry about that. I'm forgetting where we're putting it. On the YouTube channel, which if you follow RELO Bangkok on Facebook, you can find the YouTube channel. It will be put up there as well. Or AUA Thailand you can follow them on Facebook. And we are really excited to announce our next webinar. It'll be next month, and it is on critical thinking. We're really excited to have Kevin Coleary talking to us about critical thinking skills and English language instruction. So we hope you'll join us then. It is on March 12th. And it will be at the same time. We'll see you then. Thank you very much. Have a great evening. Bye, Joshua. Bye, everybody. See you later.